One of the things that burns my butter about Trump voters, MAGA people, the right in general, Republicans, Trump sympathizers, all of them, is that they love to fearmonger about the others, fearmonger about immigrants. I've done a lot of videos about those. Check the cards at the top. They love to fearmonger about Black people, clutch their pearls when it comes to trans people. They're always fearmongering about violence on the other side. Every single time. But then you have, more often than not, someone on their side, one of their supporters, ends up doing something violent, and it's crickets. Absolute crickets.
We're learning new details tonight about what the FBI is calling the largest seizure by number of finished explosive devices in their history. It happened in Isle of Wight County earlier this month when investigators took 36-year-old Brad Spafford into custody. He was released on bail yesterday, and tonight 10 on Your Side's Cheyenne Pagan joins us with the latest information.
We first reported that a 2-year investigation by the FBI led to those weapons charges against Brad Spafford. And tonight we learned from these court documents what exactly investigators say they found. Here's a picture of a freezer inside the garage on Spafford's property. And right next to the food inside, the FBI says there was a jar labeled dangerous and do not touch. It turns out they believe it matched the description of an explosive material so unstable it can explode as a result of friction or temperature changes. Also, they found what appeared to be pipe bombs in this book bag with a label on the outside that says #NoLivesMatter. The FBI says they uncovered more than 150 explosive devices on the property, including various items labeled as lethal, with some preloaded into an apparent wearable vest. Along with that were what appeared to be handwritten recipes inside a notebook of how to create explosive materials and devices. This is just a small fraction of what the FBI says they found during their search, with prosecutors claiming Spafford is a, quote, extreme danger to the community. Additional documents explain Spafford had told a neighbor that he was stockpiling weapons and homemade ammunition. That neighbor told authorities this and that, quote, Spafford and his friends are preparing for something that Spafford would not be able to do alone. Scene video shows the night Spafford was arrested 2 weeks ago. He was released on bond Monday morning. His defense argues that Spafford has no criminal record and no history of substance abuse or mental illness. They go on to say that there was no evidence that Spafford, quote, committed or attempted to commit any act of violence.
Now you have this guy, which is a very underreported story. Everybody's quietly putting out their articles about it, but nobody is really talking about it in the news. So this isn't like huge news if you get your news from like TV sources. But there's a guy in Virginia that FBI have been investigating for the last 2 years, since 2023. And they just seized the biggest explosive catch in FBI history. And it's crickets on the other side. You know why it's crickets on the other side? It's because it's one of theirs. He's a MAGA. That's why. They ain't saying nothing about it. They love to fearmonger when they think, and they're still doubling down on the New Orleans guy who is Texas homegrown. Check the card. As being a immigrant. He is not. But they still want to say that because he's brown, and they can trick you into thinking that he is an immigrant because of his name and because he's brown. But if you listen to his videos, he got the thickest Texas accent you ever want to see. Homegrown Texan. He is one of ours. But they're not saying anything about this new guy. This new guy that was in Virginia. So let me tell you guys a little bit about this story. I'm trying to get them to let me write about it in the Daily Muck, but we'll see if it comes in on my docket. But anyway, let me tell you guys about this story. I ended up getting the criminal complaint via some of my own sources. This guy started being investigated in 2023 by the FBI. This was after his neighbor had reported him and started to become an informant for the FBI. The neighbor had noticed that, he had digits missing on his hand. He had like 3 fingers missing on his hand. The neighbor, I'm looking at my notes here, that's why I'm looking off. The neighbor reported him and reported that he had, digits missing. The neighbor befriended the guy and they started talking. The neighbor found out that he had a stockpile of explosives that he was creating to do something big for this Nazi super right-wing Nazi group that he was a part of. And they were planning something really big. So he had all of this stockpile explosives and things like that in his detached barn or detached garage on this like big 20-acre plot of farmland that they had. He was talking to the neighbor and was telling the neighbor that he wanted political unalivings to return. And when the attempt on Trump happened in 2024, he told the neighbor, I hope they don't miss Kamala. So he's talking to the neighbor. The neighbor is telling the FBI what's going on. And the FBI, after getting, enough evidence, decide to charge him with a illegal weapons charge because he had a sawed-off shotgun. They come to arrest him on the 17th of December. They find out that he had 150 IED explosives that he had created, hence the missing digits. He also had a super lethal explosive in his freezer. The guy lived with his wife and his small children, and he put a super lethal explosive in his freezer. Now, they interviewed the wife, and the wife admitted that he had a huge stockpile of guns, but all of the guns that he had were legal. She didn't know anything, or at least she said she didn't know anything about any explosives, including the explosive that was right under the frozen corn in the freezer. So think about this. So many things could have happened had she just decided to I'm gonna start cleaning today. What's this? Shake, shake, boom. What is wrong with you? Anyway, it makes a little bit more sense because the group that he's a part of is a group called No Lives Matter. And that group is a subset of another group, spacing on the name right now. It's not in the report, but it's a subset of another group that is very Nazi Germany type group. Very bigoted, very racist, very that type of group. I'm feeling like he's No Lives Matter, including my family, because apparently I'm not going to warn my wife that there is an explosive in the freezer. The neighbor also told the FBI that the guy would go to the shooting range and use President Biden's face as target practice at the shooting range. So there was no question on whose side this guy was on. Another thing about this case that I thought was really, really interesting is how the judge himself didn't even want to keep this guy detained. the judge was going to let him go on a $25,000 bond. After all that, after making history as the largest catch in FBI history, with all the explosives that he had, with all the rhetoric, with the 2-year investigation from the FBI, the judge was like, yeah, that guy's fine. How is that possible? I don't want to say anything about this judge because I do not know this judge, but I feel like my man got preferential treatment, because what in the world were you looking at to think that this guy who put explosives in his freezer with his wife and young kids in the house, so explosive that they had to detonate it there because they couldn't transport it, what about that guy makes you think that he is sane enough to go back home? Judge, what? They ended up talking him out of it. Just like, judge, I think you should reconsider. The judge reconsidered, and the guy is in custody. But I'm like, that shouldn't have been so hard. That should have been like a given, right? Like, what is wrong with you? Anyway, my question to MAGA people, especially to people on the right who claim not to be like this, what do you think that people like this guy always seem to flock to your side? What is that? In order for them to characterize the left as violent, they have to jump through a lot of hoops and say a lot of untruths in order to get you to be afraid of the left. This just ain't us. People like this, where the media is super silent, always seems to be on your side. What do you even feel about that? Like, how do you justify being in a party, being on a side where terrorism is like the norm? I don't get it. The guy that with the Tesla truck and all that, one of y'all's. One of your people. You ain't hear nothing else about it. Trump still ain't said nothing about the guy that bombed his hotel. Check the card. But they still talking about New Orleans guy, even though New Orleans guy is homegrown American and probably also not on the left. I don't know that for sure. That's just speculation. But still, it's like, how do y'all justify being on that side? Like, I really want to know. Leave me a comment down below. I am extremely interested to hear how people justify being on the side of terrorists for an inflation issue that is not going to be solved.